In this video, we are going to talk about the last phase of cell respiration, and that is the electron transport chain. The electron transport chain uses electron carriers, and remember those are NADH and FADH2. These come from the citric acid cycle, which we talked about in the previous video. And again, you may have heard the citric acid cycle called the Krebs cycle. The other thing that we need to know is that this process is occurring in the membranes of the cristae. So if we're going to draw a simplified sketch, this process is occurring here. I'm going to draw the outer membrane of my mitochondria, and I'm going to draw a piece of the cristae membrane. So you can imagine that this is the same thing that I highlighted up here. And it continues on in both directions, but we're just going to have a small piece of it that we're going to work with here. There are 4 protein complexes. I'm going to simplify them by just drawing them out as circles and kind of shading them in very loosely. And again, these are protein complexes. They're made up of a lot of proteins coming together, and conveniently, these protein complexes are named in order. So you have number 1, number 2, number 3, and number 4. We need the electron carriers NADH and FADH2, which pulled electrons and hydrogens from the citric acid cycle. Both of those, so NADH and FADH2, are going to stop by, and what's going to happen here, that NADH and FADH2 lose their electrons at this first protein complex. And because with redox reactions, when we lose electrons, we're going to lose hydrogens as well, what we end up with is our NADH turning into NAD+, and our FADH2 turning into FAD. NADH and FADH2 were from the citric acid cycle, and they're called electron carriers because they carry electrons. I've shaded the protein complex, much easier to see now, but the reason why we call it electron transport is because the electrons are literally getting transported. So the electrons move from complex 1 to complex 2 to complex 3, then to complex 4. When these electrons get passed through the membrane, hydrogens cross into the matrix. So now we have a concentration gradient of hydrogens, but before we go into detail about that, we have to talk about what is going on here. Remember, electrons carry some energy with them. Complex 4 is going to be unstable if it just accepts all of this energy. But complex 3 will not take that electron back. It already got rid of the electrons. It's like, no, I don't want it. You have it. So now, what is complex 4 going to do? Well, because we have aerobic respiration, oxygen is available. And that oxygen is going to be very, very important. The oxygen is going to pick up those electrons, and it's going to pick up the hydrogens that come with it. And when that happens, you get water. So this step of respiration is only going to happen if it's aerobic. We have oxygen. Our last task is to find out what's going to happen here. Similar to light-dependent reactions of photosynthesis, when we have a high level of hydrogens inside, we can use those to our advantage. So I'm drawing another area of cristae membrane. In this area of the cristae, we're going to have our favorite protein complex, ATP synthase, which has that spinning section on the bottom, so that when enough hydrogens pass through, you'll get rotational energy, which I'm going to represent by this red arrow here. And the energy you get from that is so much that it can add a phosphate group onto ADP. And what you're left with is the molecule you've all been waiting for, and that is ATP. And thanks to our oxygen allowing all of this to happen, we get 25 ATP from this step.